So a few weeks ago, I was in a taxi and I heard the story on the radio, and it said that it was talking about this game, Candy Crush. I don't know if everyone's heard of that. It's kind of just a casual game on phones, and it said that like the top 9 million players of Candy Crush, between them play at least 3 hours a day, right? So 27 million hours of Candy Crush a day. And that's pretty mind-blowing. I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of Candy Crush. And I was kind of thinking like, like how do you quantify 27 million hours of something? What does that even mean? And I looked at kind of like big engineering projects to do that. And, one of them was the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Like this was started in 1924. It took about 1,400 workers 8 years to complete. Or another way of looking at it is about 1 day of Candy Crush. Like that's pretty mind-blowing. And this is I just kind of wanted to share the burden of this knowledge in some ways. It's not maybe super relevant to the talk, but it does kind of talk about this theme of like, it's not maybe Candy Crush or the Sydney Harbour Bridge that alone are that interesting in this case. It's really the relationship between those two things. Actually this guy, Louis von Ahn, he's a genius, I guess. He actually kind of had a similar insight about like solitaire at the time. This was like 15 years ago. Like people were playing all the solitaire on their like Windows computers because it was like bundled with the OS. And he was like, what can we, there's so much time spent doing this. Like, what can we use that in a more positive way? And he sort of created this theory and these ideas around human computation, this thing called games with a purpose. And he started a company that actually built a game where like people would come online and it was called the ESP game. And you would like guess, it was like two player and you couldn't see the other person's guesses, but if you both guessed the same word about a picture, you got points. And it would get harder and harder over time. And eventually like there were words you couldn't guess because they were too easy. And what he was actually doing was building like an addictive game, but a way to like add keywords to images that could scale and out over the entire internet. And so he kind of like got paid lots of money by Google, and he also invented this thing called reCAPTCHA. Like everyone's probably filled that out, right? Where you get 2 words, at least that version of it. He was like, why should you, why should we take like perfectly good letters and scramble them and make people guess them? That seems like a waste of effort when we can find like words that computers have trouble understanding. In this case, it was like scanning books and like words that are in the margins or kind of obscured by ink or stuff, and get people to tell us what those words are. And so that's kind of the theme like of his career. And he actually runs like this app now called Duolingo, which is a language app, which is pretty amazing too. So I guess that the point of all this is just it's about the connections between things often that where I think there's a lot of innovation. It's not like the ideas or the concepts themselves as much as the relationship they have to each other. So yeah, like Jeremy was saying, I was given the theme of flow, and in my area of sort of product imagination or whatever, it's I don't necessarily often sort of come across this concept of flow as like an immersive zone that I'm in. For me, it's the closest I think I can get to it is when I can build kind of like a model for ideas that I can refer back to. And everything sort of seems to have a place in that model, and things feel positive in that way. And so that's kind of maybe what I'll talk about and maybe try and show some examples of. It's a bit conceptual. The other thing in the email, other than the flow, was like, here are 4 talks, just have a look at them, do something a bit like that maybe. 4 amazing talks in Creative Morning history. And I did watch them and they were really good. And I thought this was from a talk by the photographer Andrew Zuckerman. It's a quote from Chuck Close. I guess I'll read it. It says, "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. If you wait around for the clouds to part and a bolt of lightning to strike you in the brain, you are not going to make an awful lot of work. All of the best ideas come out of the process. They come out of the work itself." And I think that this is, the way I sort of interpret this is, at least personally, it's hard to start with a blank sheet of paper, right? Like, it's hard to just think of good ideas, good features for an app. It's really by understanding the problem first and sort of mapping it out, and then studying the relationships between things, for me at least, that a lot of my sort of innovation comes from. So yeah, I'm the head of Product It Up. We're a digital bank. We launched about a year ago. Things have been going pretty well. We're having a lot of fun. Customers seem to like what we're doing. If you haven't heard of Up, I thought I'd just put up like a 30-second explainer rather than me talk about it. So I just took this video off our App Store page actually, and hopefully it'll play. It's kind of an abrupt ending, but so as you can see, we're kind of like smartphone app, smartphone only. It's really to help people. I mean, our sort of goal, I guess, is to help people understand their spending better, start to build savings earlier than maybe they would otherwise, and just kind of, I guess, give people an introduction to banking that doesn't require a lot of knowledge beforehand. Is just kind of intuitive. It's just kind of modern, like how we would build a bank if we started today, right? Rather than have to carry all of this legacy stuff with us. Our company is a company really of software people. There's no bankers sort of on our full-time payroll. We all started working out online or in apps and various things like that. It's a lot of what we say we're kind of technology-led banking, not banking-led technology. But really what we're doing is just applying that software mindset to all the problems in the space, whether it's fraud, security, or like even physical stuff like our card. It's 4 iterations of our card. We actually have a 5th after that and a 6th coming soon. So we kind of see hardware or the physical world as just something to iterate on as well. You can see we had a brand change there, and really between the 2nd and 3rd cards, we kind of started working with a branding agency. Before that, we kind of had done stuff that was like solid and good and clean and just kind of low friction and what you'd want. But we worked with a company, CIP, sort of based in South Yarra. Pete Johnson's the head, and he works a lot in sort of more, I guess, like lifestyle brands, whether it's food and beverage or cafes and things like that. And I think he's really brought a whole new dimension to our brand and the way people can relate to it. And I think that's kind of a big part of why Up succeeded. It's not just kind of like cool ideas and cool tech. It's actually, the way people relate to the brand. And I think he's had a big role in that. And part of that is like playfulness and humor, things that maybe you don't find in banking very often. And like, it's not always like appropriate to have humor in banking, but there are probably many times when it's fine. He's just kind of given us this pretty amazing kind of visual language and playfulness. This was our pause activation at the start of the year, which is very cool. I love that neon sign. We still have that in the office. Here's our welcome pack, which, up until this time, really, banks had been, when you get a card in the mail and it's kind of it's like an A4 sheet of paper folded 3 times with a chunk of glue on it and some, stickers and a whole bunch of just crappy boilerplate stuff. It doesn't need to be there. No one really thought about the problem. Like, what could we put on a card to make it interesting, or a welcome pack? So yeah, this was really fun to work on, and that's like the carrier is like coaster stock, and it's three layers of it sort of pasted together, and the card just pulls out easily with no chunks of glue or stickers. The numbers on the back, it's vertical, whatever, but the numbers on the back, we did that on purpose so that people could share the welcome pack without having to cover up the card number. And people do share it. It's just a small sample of, social media. And that was kind of the aim with this, which was to kind of surprise people and just get them thinking maybe there's something more to this. It's a different experience. And back to the humor, we have, I think we're at about 140,000 customers. A lot of that success has been due to word of mouth. So we have a referral program called Hook Up a Mate, and this is just kind of putting an element of humour. It's like the black triangles, the upsider, and the square circle. The yellow square's his mate, her mate. Turning into an upsider, money flowing. It's just kind of fun stuff. And that's sort of been a really interesting journey for us, more like traditional, software people, which is like pulling more and more of the brand into the app is something that we're trying to do more and more. And sometimes features can seem a little bit random, and like, why would you, like the thing I'll show you next, like why would you do that when you can't like pay a bill yet? It's a good question, but you can pay bills now, but we have this kind of like philosophy, I guess, that we always want to have like one or two bets going on, like things that this could fail or it could be amazing, like it could capture imagination or people maybe no one will care. But it's just kind of fun, right, to have a few bets always, like things that could be the thing that takes us to that, from 100,000 to 1 million customers or whatever. So one of the things we really try to focus on is having, an engaging activity feed, right? This is your spending, and like a big problem that we see is people disconnect from this, right? Like you just don't want to go and look at it. It's like, if I have to, I'll log in and see what my balance is, or if my card stops working. So if we can craft a more engaging experience, maybe we can keep people more connected to their spend. So one of the things we wanted to do, partially for the savings side effect, but also just from how it looks, is like, can we get rid of cents? Like if we round up every purchase, then all of our transactions become whole dollar amounts, and it looks better. But we still had this problem, which was like the balance can often have cents, and we're like, how do we get that 75 cents off the balance? And so we did a software update at a point in time, which meant that the whole app would just always kind of be like kept up to date. Like events would push out to the app, and so if you tapped your card and had the screen open, the new transaction would just come in. So we used to have this thing that was like pull to refresh, and we're like, what if that was pull to save? And so we built this feature, which is this. It's kind of over the top animation, but like now I have a nice round number as my balance. And people love this. Like I can spend 10 minutes trying to convince them on how good Up is and all the cool tech and features. Then you show them that pull to save, and they're like, "Oh, that's all I needed to see. That's awesome." So that was kind of what we're going for in some ways. And surprising feedback even from people saying like this. We had a couple people actually say that they had like issues with OCD, and that this was like a super useful feature for them, which is great. But I guess it's not all rosy. Maybe not everyone agrees with our take. This is the ANZ CEO. He was at a fintech, like financial technology, I think that's short for, conference last week, and he was sort of asked, like, what do you think of the sort of neobanks and the fintechs? And he said, I'm not dismissing it, but I think there are bigger threats than somebody selling the same old stuff with a nice app. It sounds like you are dismissing it, Shane. Like, that's pretty fucking dismissive. And I think, I shouldn't be too hard on him. He's actually a fellow Kiwi, but he's been a banker since 1985. And I think, like, if you're a banker, you look it up and you're like, well, it's just it's a transaction account and a saver, like a high interest savings account. Like, what's the big deal? And it's really, and I sort of understand that. That happens to a lot of products, especially when they're new, right? Like, people break them down into their parts and say, like, this isn't so special. They don't often look at sort of the things that hold that product together, and that's kind of where the value is for us. So we have this, this is essentially the manifestation of this, like, kind of strange idea of the mental model thing I'm talking about. We, like, launched with, like, a very sort of MVP, right? Like minimum viable product. You couldn't actually make payments with Up when we first got it. Like, you basically got a card that you could spend with. And that's kind of out there for a bank, like, especially in, like a lot of tech startups, they're going into spaces that are like new markets. Like, people didn't even know they had this problem yet. It's kind of a new area. But Up was approaching a market that, like, 100% saturation, right? Like, everybody already has a bank account. And in fact, our competition is essentially the 4 biggest companies in the country. So it's quite a tough space to be in. particularly when you're then going out with a product that doesn't even match the features of these other ones out there. So we kind of needed a way to communicate with customers, like, here's what, like, come on the journey with us, here's what we do today, but here's what we've got planned. So the idea of a public roadmap was something that we kind of had from the early days, but we were never quite sure like how to do it. And then we kind of came up with this idea, which was like, let's just sort of build something that reflects how we think about this problem space, and also shows like a relationship between ideas and like features that, you know, certain things can't be built before other things because they're sort of dependent. So yeah, we sent this live on our website, and you know, like, it's sort of a simple idea, but it's amazing the feedback we get from it. It really just kind of shows, here are the sort of areas of functionality we have, and here's sort of somewhat how they're linked, and you know, things can be sort of, the thing I like about it, I guess, is like, it shows like how much work there is actually to build a bank. Like, it's easy to kind of look at the app and think, oh, there's not much here. There's actually a lot. And as we build out more and more features, we kind of turn the circles orange, so you can see what's been built or what's in development. But also I like how it like connects ideas together. So you know, I'll zoom in on this one, I think it works. So this auto transfer thing is kind of connecting, identifying your pay with the capability of automated transfers. And so maybe this is a stretch, but this is kind of this theme I'm trying to express about connecting things together and those connections having value. Another bit of feedback we got was like, are you guys crazy putting all this stuff out there? Like, telling everyone what you're working on, isn't that dangerous? Like, aren't you sort of giving away your secrets? But I mean, you know, like the auto transfer stuff, like, I'll show you what we built for that. You know, like, it's just a bubble on a screen with a brief description. It doesn't really tell you what that is, how it's going to work, how it's going to feel. And you know, I think the other thing is like, there's probably not a thing on here that like a banker in one of the big four banks hasn't thought of before, or a customer hasn't asked us for. So it's not really so much the things, it's like, why are we building the things? How will they fit together? That actually is the interesting part. So that auto transfer percentage, we end up calling that payment splitting. We just shipped this last week actually, and I think it's a very cool feature and a great example of how we're approaching this space differently. And like, to Shane's point, why, you know, it's not just a nice app, it's doing something else. And this is this idea, like, when my pay comes in, I want to put percentages of it into like savers. And you know, like, the only way to do this today with a bank is like setting up, if they support this idea, is setting up like these recurring transfers that are like specific amounts that go on specific dates. And if you're like say a casual worker or a shift worker and getting different pay packets, like, that's not really practical to do. If your pay comes in a day late, these can all fall over if it's just date-based. So we wanted to do something that was like, when I get paid, like, that's an event. When I get paid, split this up by percentages. So that sort of elegance of that is percentages can never fail. If you get half the pay you got before, it's still going to work. So it's just a percentage of that amount. So the way this works is, you go to kind of you can do it with your pay or just with an account you're funding up with. That has an entry in up. You go to that and you say, I want to split payments to this contact. You enable it. I'll play this video. I've got a little video demo on the left. And then you just drag these sliders, and they feel really nice to drag because they do a little haptic feedback. And then that's it. Like, that was a few seconds, and I've created, you know, what would have been all sorts of sort of busy work, life admin stuff to do. And then on the right is what that looks like when it comes in. So we're always trying to, you know, make sure that we're not breaking our activity feed or just filling it full of junk when we do stuff like this. We want to keep everything simple and understandable. And so, you know, like, there's nothing that we've done here in a way that banks can't do or haven't been able to do, but it's just the way that it's all put together that I think is different, the way we think about the problem. So we recently did a big update actually to our tree, the tree of up. Given that it was spring and we were kind of filling it out, we thought, like, how do we, you know, what's next? Like, should we give people a like sort of a glimpse into maybe the next 6 to 9 months. And we ended up kind of really leaning into that idea and holding a meetup last week and explaining some of the stuff, which is a little bit scary because like we haven't even built that first version of the tree and now we're talking about the stuff after that. But this is what it kind of looks like, at zoomed out level. So we've added a whole bunch of green stuff to it, basically. A bunch of new ideas and concepts, and I'll just quickly go over a couple of those before I wrap up, because I think this kind of gets back to this idea of sort of thinking about, like kind of recontextualizing like ideas that we have, borrowing from other areas, and that's kind of in this space, which is sort of the intersection between like transactional banking and savings. Like we really want to keep up a simple product, and we have a lot of customers asking, I want 2 cards, 3 cards, I want to be able to create all of these, an account for bills, or, they're doing some sort of barefoot type approach that requires a couple cards. And we didn't really want to go down that path just because of the complexity of it, and it felt like just not an elegant solution. So we've kind of come up with this alternative way to do this sort of things like that. And we call it sort of covering and forwarding. And this is really borrowing ideas from email and saying, what if your transactions worked more like email? That's really the kind of the insight behind it that led to it. And even that is kind of it's a bit left field for banking, because like this question of like how do banks know how much money you have? Like we often instinctively or sort of intuitively think of our accounts sort of like a water cooler or a fuel tank of kind of being half full or empty, or just something you can look at it and kind of see the level of it. But actually that's not how, there is no kind of pot with an amount of gold in it in banking, right? It's all software, it's all just virtual, it's all this ledger stuff. It's actually something more like this, right? Which is you have 2 kind of buckets, like in banking language, it's debits and credits. Debits are all the money out, it's like your purchases and your payments out, and credits the money in. And what you do is you add up all of the credits and you subtract the debits, and that's your balance. And like the kind of obvious but mind-blowing thing about this is like the coffee I bought 2 years ago determines my balance today, because this thing goes back the whole way to when I opened the account. I think that's kind of mind-blowing in some ways. But this idea that rather than thinking about like one big number and sort of a level that I can move up and down, like an account transfer is kind of like moving the balance up or down. It's like, what if I just think about the actual actors in that, the transactions, and manipulating those directly? So that's where this kind of idea of forwarding comes in, which is like, what if I get a credit, like a payment in, and instead of going into my up spending account, I actually want that to go to a saver. I want to forward it from my spending account into a saver. Rather than just like an account transfer and I remember the amount, I want to take that transaction, these are pretty bad, sorry, and put it in my rainy day account. So here's a payment from Nicole at the top. This is just sort of a more a wireframe concept of how this could work. I can tap that and I can forward that actual transaction to a saver. I can select a saver or maybe split it using that pay splitting stuff I was showing before. But it's a very kind of simple operation. Again, it's like doesn't require new rails or new underlying technology. It's just an account transfer. But in the customer's world, it's kind of something maybe that's more intuitive. It's more borrowed from things they already understand. And I think, like the flip side of that is something we call covering, which is saying, I've spent money on something, but actually I want to pay for that out of a saver. And this is kind of how we do it without having lots of cards. So the debit came into my up spending. I actually want to move that debit over to my home renovation saver in this case. So there's my Bunnings warehouse purchase at the top. And I say I want to cover that purchase. And I can pull that out of my home renovation saver. And then the money's transferred from that saver, under the hood, from that saver to the spending account. And kind of nerding out about it, I can actually get that data of that transaction, that metadata, and put that in the saver. And now I sort of have this ability to create, budgets or expense accounts for like a renovation or a wedding or an overseas holiday, and actually see what I spent that money on and sort of control that spending through a saver. And really where this gets even more exciting will be kind of the automation of this. So this can just happen automatically without me having to go in and do it myself. So I don't know, hopefully that kind of all made sense and as a whole. Just taking these very simple ideas or borrowing ideas from other contexts and linking them together is kind of how we see kind of innovation working in up. So thanks for your time.